From the 14-game win streak to finally end in the drought and even winning a playoff series in Toronto, today we say thank you to the 2022 Seattle Mariners. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Tuesday, October 18th, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link as well as our social accounts is in the description below. On the show today, we'll be reflecting on the 2022 season and saying thank you to this wonderful Mariners ball club. We'll go over some of our favorite memories from the year, talk about what this team is poised to do in the future, and plenty more. This is mostly going to be a casual, laid-back chat, and we'll also want to hear from you down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, so be sure to comment below. Tell us your thoughts on the season. What's your favorite memory from the season? All that good stuff. Colby, I want to start here. To me, and obviously this is a very low bar for the Mariners to clear, but this was my favorite season of my life watching baseball. I assume the same for you, right?
I don't know. 2001 was pretty good, but I was still young enough that didn't really I had nothing to compare it to at the time. It's kind of my first year really watching baseball. So, yeah, almost by default, it's probably this team. Not that they didn't earn it based on how they played and all that stuff. But, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you have one playoff team in the last, 20 years. It's probably your favorite one to watch, right? So, it had a lot of the elements of the other teams that we liked here in Seattle. They had, some personality, some fun, but they just also decided to add winning and winning a lot to their bag of tricks. And, so you add that all together and seems pretty obvious this is probably a lot of people's favorite team over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 26 years old. I, was conscious for the 2001 season, and I love that season, but, as I've gotten older, I don't remember everything about that season either. At least my personal experience watching that season. I remember the All-Star game. I remember a couple things here and there about the postseason and all that. And, towards the end when they clinched and, how 9/11 impacted everything and all that. But that's really it. This season, obviously, because I'm, an adult and I'm more conscious watching this season play out, I'm going to remember this more. And obviously, for you and I, specifically, we have a really big emotional attachment to this season because you and I covered it the whole year here on Locked On our Patreon, all that. And you and I also got to go to some of the biggest moments of this season in person. You got to see the clinch. You got to see the first playoff game in 21 years in Seattle. I got to go to the Mariners' first playoff game in 21 years in Toronto. Got to see them win their first playoff series in 21 years. We got to experience those things, right there, front and center, and got to cover this team and help, tell the story of this team. And for that, I'm incredibly honored, and I'm so grateful to, our listeners over this past year. We've added a lot of new listeners because, we started Locked On, in August of 2021, but really this was the year that things kicked off for us here on Locked On, and it's been great to see the community grow. It's great to see, and it's not just our experiences, our personal experiences. It's also some of the experiences that other people in the community have had as well, like Sophie with sending a pizza to Jesse Winker, and how that all blew up, and how that kind of was part of that moment where things started to turn around for the Mariners. And it's really cool to see, this community really be a part of this thing as well, and get to really share it with the players and the coaches and everyone involved in the organization. It's been a lot of fun to watch play out. It was a great year. And I've loved every single moment of it. For you though, obviously there's the big moments, the ending the drought, Julio's derby performance, the 14-game win streak, the playoff series, all that. But outside of those things, let's dig a little deeper here. What was one of your favorite moments from this season for the Mariners?
The brawl.
Yeah.
It has to be the brawl. Ty and I have been team brawl for, I don't know, since we met 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it was. So yeah, the brawls is a big one. A lot of people point to it as the turning point. That's really simple. Like, that's an easy thing to do. I don't happen to agree with them that that's the turning point, but it is, the easiest thing to point to. And I don't know, a few days later, maybe a week later, they kind of started their it was a couple weeks later, they started their winning streak, and that obviously propelled them to the playoffs. But yeah, I think it's the brawl. It's kind of the sense of fire that we hadn't really seen from Mariners teams in the past. And this wasn't like it was a Mariners team that was like playing amazing baseball at the time. This was a team that was, kind of struggling and uh, didn't really have an identity yet. And then, the Angels come along, and because the Angels are losers and bums, they decide to pick a fight, and the Mariners come together and they rally together, and they beat the Angels physically. On the field, they didn't win that day, but they won so much more. And the subsequent suspensions that followed, I think the Mariners lost one game during those suspensions. So uh, yeah, yeah, it it was just kind of the turning point moments. I think that's an easy one to point to. Again, I don't think that actually mattered. I think they were starting to play a little bit better at that point. But that's kind of the easy one to point to right there.
For me, it was the comeback against the Braves. You
Yep.
had, a pretty big lead. You end up blowing it, and it's like, oh, man, you had such a great opportunity there to take a series from one of the best teams in baseball, the defending world champions. And you just feel so dejected, but then you see Julio coming off of the field, and he's smiling, and it's like, that's weird. And then he goes up to the plate, ties the game up, and then a couple batters later, Eugenio Suarez wins the game, and that was the most pumped up I've been over a Mariners game, like verbally, like physically, like pumped up. Like I popped off when that happened, in like a really long time. Like, I don't remember getting that excited over a Mariners game in a really long time. I think the last time that I actually popped off that much over a Mariners moment was when Mitch Haniger hit the walk off against the Angels in the rain. Do we remember
The
that
Facebook game, yeah.
Yeah, the Facebook game back when MLB thought it would be a great idea to air games on Facebook. Ugh.
They're so dumb.
And now they're just doing it on YouTube, which
How about it's Major League Baseball stupid. Let's just call it like it is.
It's really bad. It's really bad.
How about the smackdown the Astros laid on the Mariners that nobody remembers because it happened to be the same night the Mariners acquired one Luis Castillo. So obviously the acquisition of Luis Castillo is a huge one. And it appears like it's going to pay dividends for at least a couple more years. So I think of that, July night where we're just kind of sitting there and wondering what Jerry's going to do. There was a lot of talk about Frankie Montas at that point, and it kind of seemed like maybe the Mariners were kind of going in that direction. It sure seemed like Luis Castillo was going to end up being a Yankee. And so we were kind of sitting there going, well, I mean, they have to get a pitcher. I mean, is there anybody else? And then, I think Passan is actually broke that one, not the Mariners. And you just see the tweet and nobody cares about the game now. Yeah, we're down 12-0. Who cares? We just got Luis Castillo. It's awesome. And then the adrenaline of popping on that emergency pod and working through the deal and all of that stuff, and just kind of a moment of like they're serious here. This isn't like, well, we can sneak in, that's great. If not, we'll attack it next winter, and like next year is really going to be our year. No, they put their foot down and they said, no, this is our year. And they went out and they got the best pitcher that was moved at the deadline, and turns out the right one, because Frankie Montas really struggled for the Yankees down the stretch. And they gave up a good price to get him, and has been worth every penny so far, and then some. So that was a pretty big moment, I would say.
And to your point about, knowing that they were serious, I mean, that's another reason why I love the Braves comeback so much, because it's like, this team is legit. It can come up in big moments against really, really good teams, against the cream of the crop, and win. And that was the moment that I believe that they could, that I truly believed and bought into the idea that they could win in the postseason and go deep into the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
And they won a postseason series. They played the Astros pretty well. And, I think this team is in a good spot. We're going to be talking about that a little later on. But first, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. We are saying thank you to the 2022 Seattle Mariners on today's episode. And that's right. Thank you, Seattle Mariners, for making the last 6 months of all of our lives a little bit better with your baseball playing ways. It was pretty great to watch you guys all year long and follow along on this incredible journey. It was truly an incredible journey when you really think about it, from being, down 29 and 39. Well, I mean, let's go back even further. This team it started out pretty well this season. And then, injuries started to pile up and guys just weren't really performing as well. You think about guys like Jesse Winker and Robbie Ray and their slow starts to the year. And it just kind of felt like, oh man, this is another year. You're just going to chalk up another year to the drought. This is going to continue. We're going to have to hear about this for another off season. And things got, really bad. There were people calling for Jerry Dipoto's job. There were people calling for Scott Service's job. There was, all that. And we don't need to get into all that. But, this team hit a really big low point. And then to be able to turn things around in historic fashion. I remember doing the research back when they were 29 and 39. And obviously playoff format's different this year, so it doesn't necessarily apply. But there were only two teams that had started out with that same record that went on to make the postseason. And I believe it was both, it was the Dodgers and the Astros, and it was 2005 or 2007, something like that. It was very rare, and it just felt impossible that this team was going to turn it around with all the injuries that it sustained, with all the guys that were struggling. But they did it. And they were able to basically able to snowball into one of the biggest threats in Major League Baseball. And again, we're able to go toe to toe with some of the best teams in the world, able to win series against some of the best teams in the world. And they were able to go and win a postseason series and go up against, a 106 win team. And yeah, they got swept, but I think we can all agree here that they played them pretty well at the end of the day. And that makes me pretty hopeful for what this team is going to be able to do in the future, because Colby, this team in theory, we don't know if they're actually going to spend, but they have shown signs that they are willing to do so. But this team does in theory have a lot of money and available payroll. They're still well off from the ceiling that they sat at when Robinson Cano was here and Nelson Cruz was here and Felix was here and Kyle Seager was here, all those guys. And they have one of the best farm systems in baseball still. Yes, it's taken a hit with some of the trades that they made and some of the graduations that they've had, but this is still a really good farm system with a lot of interesting prospects that I think are going to be of interest to teams. So they have ammunition to go out and get not only better, but significantly better. And so with the way that they played this year, with some of the developments and growth that we saw this year, and with the resources that they have at their disposal heading into this offseason, and some key players hitting free agency, but not a ton of key players hitting free agency, I mean, you have to feel great about what this team can do in 2023, right?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to understand is that the Mariners just have a lot of work to do. It's kind of this weird dichotomy where the Mariners have a lot of work to do to reach their ultimate goal of winning a World Series, and yet they might have never been closer in their entire history to getting there. So, yeah, the Mariners need to do things this winter. They need to do impactful things. They need to. You can't just skirt around the edges of the roster and expect to do better. But I think you do have to feel pretty good about where the Mariners are at. And again, for me, when I see Stanton, write the check for Carlos Correa or Xander Bogaerts or whatever, then I'll believe that he's willing to do that. But he's has written checks for Luis Castillo and Julio Rodriguez, so I get why some people are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. I'm just not yet until he actually does it. But yeah, I mean, like you said, the money is there. It should be there. It better be there. The prospect capital, again, the farm system's not as good as it was a year ago, but that's for good reason, right? You've graduated Julio Rodriguez and George Kirby and Logan Gilbert and Cal Raleigh, and you've leveraged other, really highly thought of prospects like Noel V. Marte and Edwin Arroyo, and you've leveraged them into Luis Castillo, and you leveraged Williamson and who's the other guy?
Connor Phillips.
Thank you, Connor Phillips. And you leverage that into Eugenio Suarez and Jesse Winker. So,
by the way, real quick, just before we go further, we will we are aware of the Jesse Winker stuff that came out today from Ryan Divish. We're going to talk about that later on this week. Today, though, we wanted to just stay positive and just kind of talk about this team in a positive sense.
Right. And so, yeah, the foundation's been laid, and it didn't cost nearly as much as it costs to lay the foundation of, the Jack Sorensic team. So the Mariners have to be feeling pretty good about this. They have a baseball ops department that has an eye for talent, has an eye for development. They're good at these things, and they're in a good spot. So if ownership is willing to open up the checkbook, and I don't mean, oh, look, they let Jerry sign an $8 million reliever. That's meaningless, right? Are you going to cut the $150 million, $200 million check that it's going to take to get Correa or Turner or Bogarts or Swanson or Judge or Nimmo plus whatever, right? Are you going to be willing to do that? And if the answer is yes, then the Mariners should be very excited. If the answer is no, there might be some, there probably is a cap on what you can be as a baseball team. And it's probably what you saw this year. So ownership has to step up. The Mariners front office did their part. The player development has done their part. The fans have done their part. It's on ownership now. And whether or not you feel good about it, I think it's a valid opinion either way. You feel good about John Stanton? Fine. All right, cool. You don't feel good about him? I totally get it. I don't really either right now. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think overall the tone has to be of optimism that this team is going to get the players they need to get this winter.
Yeah, I would say that I don't necessarily feel good about John Stanton, but I feel better about John Stanton after the Castillo and Rodriguez extensions. I'm not yet ready to buy in on him now suddenly being willing to go back to a $180 million payroll. And let's also make one thing clear, that the Mariners don't necessarily need to get to that number to build a great baseball team. They can go out and trade for guys that, are still, 3, 4, 5 win players, and they don't make a ton of money, right? That doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is the value that they add, not the money that they add. And so, that's going to be a discussion. That's going to be a thing that we're going to remind people of over the course of the offseason, depending on how things go. But yeah, the Mariners should be, to your point, the Mariners have to be willing to do that in order to get significantly better, in order to get to where they want to go, which is, to me, you want to be in a position to actually feasibly be able to compete for the division next year and compete for a World Series next year. Because the drought is over. You've won a wild card. Now the goalposts have to shift.
Yeah. Last winter they weren't really willing to do that. We know that they were interested in big free agents. They actually got Robbie Ray. And we know that they made, pretty good offers to Trevor Story and Simeon, I believe is the other one we heard. Yeah. That they had made some pretty good offers, but they weren't willing to go over the top to get those guys. Are they going to be willing to do that this year? if you go to Correa hypothetically or Xander, pick whichever one you want, right? And you offer them 180 million, and they say, "Well, we want 200 million over the same time span." Is John Stanton going to say yes? He should. You can argue whether he should have done that last year too, but kind of a good thing he didn't with Trevor Story, right? And Jerry clearly had that line of demarcation that this is the most we're willing to give you. Is that going to be put in place this year? I don't know. And obviously there's a point where it just, no matter how much you want the player, the price just becomes an issue and you just have to drop out. And you might get there with Bogarts or Turner or whatever. Pick the shortstop you want. I'm tired of listing them all. We're just going to start calling them the shortstops.
Yes.
Pick the shortstop that you want and, set the price. And if he says, "Hey, I'm interested, but I want, an extra 5 million a season than what you're offering," is John Stanton going to say yes?
Right.
And is he going to say yes without saying, "Well, yeah, Jerry, you can do that, but that 5 million is coming out of your budget. Like you're not, like, I'm not letting you spend 5 million over your budget," because that's not what World Series teams do.
Mm-hmm.
World Series teams swallow the 5 million just to get the best player they can.
They go for
And
the
that's
kill shot.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the Mariners are right now. They have an opportunity to not only build on this momentum, but also build on all the hard work that's gone into the last 5 years of this rebuild to not necessarily put a capper on it, but to kind of push this thing over the mountaintop, like get it to right now. You're still pushing that boulder up the hill, and it feels like you've reached the mountaintop, but you haven't. You haven't won the World Series yet. You've reached a great plateau, and that's amazing. But now it's time to start pushing that rock again, and now it's time to get to a World Series, and money should not stand in the way, within reason of John Stanton's pursuit of a World Series that he claims he wants so badly. We're about to find out.
And this year, I think the Mariners are not going to run into as many challenges to attract free agents. And I tweeted this shortly after the loss on Saturday that people definitely noticed. People definitely noticed that atmosphere, what this team has done over the last few weeks, what it did in Toronto, and just how well it played against Houston and all that. It sees how close this team is to competing. And now, close is kind of a relative term, right? Because it means that you still have to put a lot of work in. There's still a lot of work to be done on this roster. They're still well ways off from what the Astros are. They finished 16 games behind the Astros. They got to make up a lot of ground there still in order to feasibly compete for a division. But players noticed. Players around the league noticed. Players that are about to hit free agency noticed. And more importantly, agents noticed. That's the big thing. And if agents actually want their player to play in Seattle because they think that they can get the money and they can, that place can elevate their client, then you're in a good spot if you're the Mariners. You don't have to do as much selling as they've had to do in the past. There are still going to be hurdles that get in the way of bringing players to Seattle, like the travel. Those things, like the geography, you're not going to be able to change that, right? Those things are ultimately out of your control. Some guys are just not going to want to live in Seattle for half a year and do all the travel that is necessary. And plus, there's going to be even more travel involved this year because you're going to be facing more teams. You're going to be going all around the country, even more so than in the past because of how the schedule is changing. And the fact that you are going to play every single team at least once a year. So, that's going to still factor in, but you're not going to have to, there shouldn't be as much of a tax on you anymore for being, a cellar dweller, for lack of a better term, in Major League Baseball. You're now a playoff team and you did some damage in the playoffs. And I think that was really important because it's one thing to get to the playoffs and in the drought, that's a cool story. Most people feel great about that, whatever, but actually being able to go into not only a playoff series, but a playoff series in a hostile environment against a really talented team, a team that you and I, Colby, have said was about a year ahead of the Mariners in terms of their rebuild. And, you swept them and you had one of the most historic comebacks in all of playoff history. I think that does matter. And so, players are going to want to be a part of that. They see this clubhouse. They see how much fun they're having. They see, the likes of George Kirby and Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh and these young guys that tells these players and tells these agents, like, this is a sustainable product potentially. This is not something that is, you go there and you have like a 1 to 2 year window. This is a potential for a decade long window in Seattle, something that is really exciting for, younger players, and Carlos Correa is, approaching 30, I believe, but like, he's
27.
27. Okay. Yeah. So like, even though that he's like, past 25, like that's still a really young player that's, still has a lot of years ahead of him, that, that's going to be appealing to someone like that it's not, I'm going to have to go through a rebuild process like a Marcus Semien, right? Marcus Semien and Corey Seager, they chose to go through a rebuild process for the end goal, which is like 3 or 4 years down the road in Texas. Meanwhile, in Seattle, it's like you can win now and you can potentially win like 5 or 6 years down the road as well if you want to sign a long-term contract here. So that's also going to be appealing. The Mariners just have a lot of things that are like, they don't even need to sell guys on. Like it speaks for itself. The situation itself speaks for itself. And so that puts the Mariners in a different position. And like I said on Twitter a few days ago, this is going to be an offseason, I think, that is unlike any other we've seen for the Mariners in quite some time. That players are actually going to want to come to Seattle and be a part of this thing. Whereas in the past, it's been the Mariners have had to bend over backwards to get players to come to Seattle for the most part.
Yeah. I think what Ty's trying to say is gear up for another Richie Sexson and Adrian Beltre free agent signing winter because it worked out so well the first time.
Let's maybe not do that. Let's maybe not do that. Even though I love Adrian Beltre and Richie Sexson gave us our last brawl before Jesse Winker did. Mm-hmm. But let's maybe get better production out of our free agent signings.
Richie was pretty good for the first 2 years, but yeah. Let's not go do the Sean Figgins thing. Let's pay for top of market guys and guys who we think are very, very, very likely to be all-stars and stuff like that. Like let's not settle for, C-tier baseball players anymore. Let's go out, let's flex some financial muscle. Let's go get somebody, or let's leverage the farm again. Now it's going to be harder because you've leveraged it pretty good over the last year. And like I said, gotten amazing results out of it. So it's a little bit harder to do that, but it's, money is money. And like Ty said, sometimes money's just not the answer, right? You can't just here, Xander, here's $250 million. Well, I would sign that, but I want to play in Boston and they're offering me this. So I'm going to sign with Boston. Yeah. You can't be Boston. Like there's just going to be moments like that. And so money is helpful. It's not going to solve all your issues. Jerry's still going to have to make trades. He's still going to have to be creative. And Justin, they're still going to have to be creative. They're still going to have to get things done.
By the way, we should clarify what we were saying on our Patreon show yesterday about when we say Jerry, what that means. That's just now like we got to think about what it means, but it's basically an acronym for what the front office is for the Mariners front office.
Like it's Jerry's front office, but Justin's the whatever. I don't know who the new assistant GM is, so blah 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 blah. Whatever. It's all
help us figure out what Jerry stands for. The J, the E, the R, and the Y. Help us figure out what that stands for, and that will be our acronym.
That'll be fun because nothing can. There's no letter there that can correspond to Mariners baseball front or office. So you guys figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
exactly.
Jerry and company. They're still gonna have to get creative, both with money and trades. Because they don't have an endless amount, right? They don't have Steve Cohen and the Mets payroll, right? They're not going to have the Dodgers payroll. It's just not ever going to be the case. So they're still going to have to be creative, but they still have to fish at the top of the market. And, that means that maybe they can afford to fish for one of the top guys, but not two when they need two. And then they got to get creative and come up with the production for the second guy. And so we'll see what they decide to do there. But money shouldn't be an obstacle this winter. I don't think it's fair to say it was last year because they did, make some pretty sizable offers, but only one of them got accepted. So we'll see how it goes. But again, Jerry's going to have to get creative, and I think he is going to put a lot of effort into landing one of those shortstops. But again, there's 25 teams who could use an upgrade at shortstop. You're one of them, and there's only 4 shortstops in this class that are worth anything more than JP Crawford. So you guys can do the math. So yeah, pick whichever one you want. I'm here to tell you it's not going to be Trey Turner, and I would be absolutely shocked if it was Dansby. So you can do the math and figure out which two seem like their only shot. And
I mean,
honestly,
Colby, the Mariners made it as far as the Braves did. So
yeah,
I think Dansby's
Dansby's
staying in
a Southern
Atlanta.
boy who went to school in Vanderbilt. Like,
yeah.
that seems
Dansby's staying in Atlanta. Trey's staying in LA, or he's probably going East Coast or something like that if he does leave.
right. In which case, the
Xander
Dodgers,
Correa, though.
yeah, and the Dodgers are going to get one of these shortstops. So, like, if
Yeah.
Turner leaves, they're going to sign somebody else.
Yeah.
One of these guys. So, yeah, you kind of want Turner to stay. If you're not getting Turner, you want him to stay with the Dodgers. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about all these guys a lot as the winter goes along.
Oh, yeah.
So we can get into the whole Correa versus Bogarts versus whatever, because I think Ty and I would each pick a different person. So that would be a fun conversation to have. But it's probably your best bet to get a high impact bat at a position of need is one of the shortstops. Can they get it done? I think that's going to be as much about John Stanton as it is, Jerry and the front office. So we'll see. They can finally land their big fish.
By the way, I looked it up, and yeah, I thought that Correa was like 28 or 29. He just turned 28 26 days ago. So
he was drafted. Yeah, he was drafted at like 17, and he made the big leagues at like 20. So
drafted in 2012. Yeah, it feels like he's been around forever. Like it's hard to like
about
imagine that he's still
7-8 year career in the big leagues right now. So that's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Start young.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that he's still that young to this day, considering how much MLB action he's logged. All right, so we're not necessarily closing the door on the 2022 season yet here on Locked On Mariners. We're going to be doing some team awards. We're going to be doing player reviews and just kind of state of the team stuff and all that over the next couple weeks here on the show. But Colby, do you have any closing thoughts on just this team as a whole as we start to look ahead to the future?
Bunch of losers couldn't win no. No, it was a very good team. It was not a great team. It is the type of team that I think needed to end the drought, if that makes sense. It was not a dry team. It wasn't a team full of 35-year-olds who kind of hate each other and all that stuff. It was a fairly young team with a few energetic and enigmatic veterans like Eugenio Suarez and Mitch Haniger. Just kind of a weird group, right, of guys but most of them young, most of them definitely coming back next year, or at least under contract to come back next year. I think this is the type of team that you needed to in the drought, because it's like if it had been the old team, right, the Cano and the Cruz and this, like, fine, whatever, they'd still be celebrated, but it just would feel different because, okay, you did it once. Are you likely to do it again? No real reason to suspect they will. So I think it's important that it was this type of team, this young, energetic team that has club control out the wazoo and tons of personality and tons of star power. I think it had to be a team like this. And so the 2022 Seattle Mariners were just kind of the perfect team for the perfect situation that happened to be at the perfect time. And just based on the way it ended, and you just look at Julio and Cal, and like, these are guys who are going to be, spoken of in with reverence for decades after they've retired. It feels like we're as close to the Griffey, Edgar, Jay Buhner like level of fan connection that we've been since they all retired.
I think the word you were looking for this team and for these players is family. And like most families,
not Jesse,
there's some there was some well, again, like most families, there's some dysfunctional parts to it, but at the end of the day, this was a family. It was really cool to see this team come closer, because at the start of the year, it did feel a little disjointed because there were a lot of new faces, but there was still the guys that carried over from 2021, which was also such a family. It was the makeup of that team was like a family too, in a
Except
way.
for Kyle Seager.
Stop it, you. But yes, you're right. You're correct. But as over the months, as the season grew older and older, we started to see this team start to come together a lot more, and that was a beautiful thing to watch. And it kind of coincided with the winning, right? The closer this team got, the more it seemed like they won. And it was just awesome to see. It was really awesome to connect with these players and for them to be the ones that did it. I think this team ultimately, at the end of the day, deserved to be the ones that did it. And they will forever be in Mariners lore, from top to bottom. Every single player that came through this club, even the likes of Justin Upton, they are going to be forever in Mariners lore as a part of the team that did it, that finally did it, that finally ended it.
But not Steven Souza.
But not Steven Souza. Yes, we do need to make that
Don't
point.
forget the Mike Fords and the Drew Steckenriders.
And the Matt Cooks.
Yes.
Stuart Fairchild.
Yeah.
Did he
Cooks
even
out.
play?
I think he appeared in one game. But yeah, all the Washington natives who came back home and pitched in this this playoff drought, like Stuart Fairchild and Matt Boyd and Jake Lamb. So man, we were so close to the Jake Lamb game against Cleveland. So close.
Dang
it, Andres. There you go. Maybe that's a segment for later on in the week. Can you name every player to appear in a game for the Seattle Mariners this year? I'm going to guess probably
like
not.
A Sporkle quiz. There's probably a Sporkle quiz that has all
I'm going
those.
to say probably not, but the 2022 Mariners are going to be remembered forever in franchise history. We'll see if they get a banner up there in the Raptors. Typically, those are reserved for division winners, and you weren't even close. So we'll see. We'll see what John Stanton decides he wants to spend money on. Cheap son of a gun, but we'll see if he wants to get the $3,000 banner made or whatever. No, it's a team that's going to be remembered forever. It's the drought breaker, the rainmaker. It's that's what they're known for now. They are forever. I don't know. I'm sure Mariners fans will come up with a creative name for this group. Like I said, rainmakers, drought busters, whatever they end up calling them, but they're forever going to be a part of that team, and that's something that they can kind of wear as like a badge of honor when their career is over, that they were the group that did it and ended the longest playoff drought in North American sports.
So at the end of all of this, thank you once again to the 2022 Seattle Mariners. You guys were so much fun to watch. You represented the city of Seattle well. You represented this fan base incredibly well. And for that, we are forever grateful. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Mariners. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's CANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.